homelessness, culpability, fairness, and power. Let's assume that everyone who is homeless in the United States is culpable for their homelessness, meaning they are the sole cause of their own homelessness. This assumption that a homeless person can be the sole cause of their homelessness is wrong. But for me to prove that will take a while. So for now, let's go with the assumption. Next, on any given night, there are over 650,000 homeless people in the United States. It's not the same 650,000 throughout the year. Every night, 650,000 people are homeless in the United States, and 40% of those are under the age of 18. So already we have a little problem with the culpability. How can you blame 40% of those homeless people who are children for their own homelessness? Right now, that's not what we want to talk about. So let's pretend that all homeless people are completely culpable for their own homelessness. Let's talk about fairness for a second. I will link in the description to one of my favorite illustrations of how the concept of fairness is at least partially innate. It's the result of evolution, not the result of education or religion or philosophy or politics, culture. There are some core ideas of fairness that are the result of evolution. Doesn't mean they're right. Doesn't mean they're good. Doesn't mean they're the best. Also doesn't mean that they're wrong or bad or anything. But they are there, and it's extremely important that we acknowledge that they are there. Otherwise, we can't modify them if we want to modify them. One concept of fairness that exists in the contemporary United States is that if someone created their own problem, it's unfair to burden other people with that problem. You gotta fix your own mess is a common belief in the United States. Because all homeless people are completely culpable for their homelessness, the fair thing to do is to place all of the burden of fixing the homelessness on the homeless person. And it's not fair to burden other people with fixing the homelessness. That statement allows for charity. If a person who is not homeless wants to be charitable and assist a homeless person, especially assist them in completely fixing their homelessness, that is acceptable. It does not violate our ideas about fairness. But if the government, for example, taxed all people and then used that tax to fix homelessness for homeless people, that would seem to violate our idea of fairness and culpability, because the burden is being shifted from the homeless person who is culpable to people who are not culpable. Quick reminder, I said assume these things about culpability and fairness. I am not saying they are true. Therefore, if we view homelessness from only this perspective, it would be inherently unfair to force all people in the United States to pay for fixing homelessness for only 650,000 people a night. And 650,000 people is a lot, but the population of the United States is almost 330 million. Percentage-wise, 650,000 people is a relatively small number. If we conclude our analysis at that point, then we, as a society, should not force all people to pay for fixing the homelessness of a few people. But I mentioned 4 things: homelessness, culpability, fairness, and power. The nature of homelessness requires that the homeless person has exceptionally little power. No matter how you want to define power, and it does not matter what domain we are talking about, a homeless person has very little power. political power, economic power, power to affect other people, power to affect their own lives. And that's key. There's 650,000 homeless people every night. There's 330 million people in the United States. Those 650,000 homeless people, how much power do they have to change their homelessness? It's really difficult to express that as an absolute quantity, so let's talk about it as a relative quantity of power. You have 650,000 homeless people, and their power to change their life is not collective. So if one homeless person changes his or her homeless status, that does not impact the other people necessarily. Of course, if the one person is a single parent and has a child, well, yes, then it affects two people. One person changing their status does not necessarily change any of the other people. Now let's look at the 330 million people. Of the 330 million people, approximately 75% of them are adults. I want to go ahead and exclude the children, so I'm going to round up to 250 million adults. You know what? I'm not going to do that. I'm going to round down to 240 million adults. That way it also excludes homeless people. Contrasted with the 650,000 homeless, we have 240 million adults who are not homeless. What is their power to change the status of the 650,000 homeless people? Just by sheer numbers, they have a dramatically higher collective power than homeless people. It's absurd, the difference. Just looking at 240 million versus 650,000. But there's more, because the 650,000 are homeless. And the 240 million we have defined as not homeless. The 240 million, each individual has more power. And the power disparity is even larger, because the 650,000, we included the children. 40% of them are children. But in the 240 million, we excluded children. So now the power disparity is even greater, but it increases more. The 650,000 homeless people, this is not a unit. They have no ability to work together as one unit. The 240 million adults, however, do have that ability. It's called government. Every interstate highway in the United States was effectively built by and is effectively maintained by 240 million people because of their ability to coordinate their actions through government. That is incredibly powerful. Imagine trying to build all of the roads in the United States through individual action that is not coordinated. Imagine trying to build an aircraft carrier for the Navy without a government, police, firefighters, running an election, education. The ability of a government to coordinate and integrate the power of multiple individuals is extraordinary. In the contemporary United States, that ability is almost exclusively exercised economically through things such as taxes and expenditures. There are other ways it can be done and has been done. You can look to the Incan Empire, for example, that levied a tax in the form of labor. That was a relatively common practice in ancient civilizations. Based on our assumptions, fairness suggests that the 650,000 homeless people should bear all of the burden of changing their homeless status, and that Other people can choose to be charitable, and our assumptions and analysis through fairness suggest that requiring 240 million people to help in any way would be wrong. So far, our analysis of power to change the homeless status says we're going to be a lot more successful if we can harness the collective power of 240 million people. But it doesn't mean we should. So let's go one step further with the power analysis. There are 650,000 homeless people any given night. Do they have the power to change their homeless status? Some of them, yes. To prove that, all we have to do is find one person who was previously homeless and, through their own efforts, change their status to not be homeless. That's a trivial task. We can certainly accomplish that. In fact, I'm an example. When I was 22 years old, I was homeless for about 3 weeks. I got a job. When I got my first paycheck, I used it to rent a small, very small room in a Ukrainian Orthodox monastery. I'm not kidding. It's in Houston, Texas, in the United States. It's not in the Ukraine. Ukrainian Orthodox monastery. And I lived there for many months. But before that, I was homeless for 3 weeks. And I was able to change my status through my own efforts and without charity. So we know for sure that some of the 650,000 people have the power to change their status. What about all? Can we say that all of those people have the power to change their homeless status? No. And again, we only have to find one example to prove that not all have that power. And that is sadly trivial. So we know that some homeless people do not have the power to change their status, and that some homeless people do have the power to change their status. But those are the extremes. Where is the actual number, the percentage? Is it close to 99% have the power to change their status, or is it close to 5% have the power? It's not at either one of those extremes. So now I'm going to tweak it a little bit, because the ability to change your status is one thing. How quickly you can change your status is another thing. In my example of myself, I was able to change my status in only 3 weeks. That happens to some people. Many people are chronically homeless, meaning they have homelessness for an extended period. And they may have some power to change their status, but not quickly. It may take them months or years to change their homeless status. I told you that 650,000 people on any given night are homeless, and I told you that it's not the same 650,000 people throughout the year. And my example of me being homeless for 3 weeks when I was 22 years old helps to illustrate that. So if you have a homeless person who has the power to change their status, but it will take them 3 years or 6 months to change their status, then there will be homelessness on every night of the year. We're going to divide our homeless population into 3 categories, 2 of which we've already defined. One category is those people who are homeless and have the power to change their status in short order. And we'll go ahead and put me, when I was 22, into that category. I was able to change my status in 3 weeks. The other category we defined are homeless people who have zero power to change their status. Now we're going to define a third category. These are homeless people who have some power to change their status, but the amount of time it will take is a minimum of 6 months. 6 months is long enough that their homeless status will have real and detrimental effects on them, their long term, and real and detrimental effects on society. And, this is important, 6 months is long enough that while they are homeless, there is a risk that other things will happen that will decrease their power to change their status. And I can give you an example. Pandemic. If you're homeless during a pandemic, and in the United States, 21 million adults have lost their job in less than 60 days, your ability, your power as a homeless person to change your status has now dramatically decreased through no fault of your own. So 6 months or longer to change your own status is risky, especially because homeless people are higher risk for just about every single problem in the world, like disease, being the victim of a crime, police harassment, and police brutality. Now that we have 3 categories, it's much easier to see that the overwhelming majority of the people who are homeless in the United States effectively have no power to change their status. Their status can only change with assistance from others. Let me show you. People who can change their status, we define them as a category. Obviously, they can change their status. 40% of the homeless people are children. They have no power to change their status. So immediately, 40% have no power. Even if they are only homeless for 1 week, they did not change their status. That's important. One child who is homeless for 1 night, they were completely powerless to avoid the homelessness, and they were completely powerless to end the homelessness. So it does not matter for how long they were homeless. We're talking about the power to end the status of homelessness. And those 40% are completely disabled. That's the opposite of power. Then, of the adults, there are many people that because of chronic health problems, developmental disabilities, a criminal history, poor decision-making skills, or extreme poverty, or a combination of a little bit of many things, and not change their status. Let's move to the 3rd category we defined of people who have the power, but it will take at least 6 months. That we know is true because all you have to do is measure the homeless population and see how many of them have been homeless for at least 6 months. It's a lot. 40% children, plus how many ever adults absolutely cannot change their life, and then how many ever adults can, but it takes more than 6 months. Add those together, and it's the overwhelming majority of the homeless population. We also know this is true because we can look at it from a thought experiment point of view. 650,000 homeless people tonight. How many of them want to be homeless? There's not 200,000 people wandering around the United States going, I love being homeless. I would never want to change it. 150,000? 100,000? Of the 650,000, the overwhelming majority of them want to change their status. So why haven't they? It's because they can't. It's because they lack the power. They either are completely disabled from changing their status, or to change their status would require 6 months or more. So there's 2 different ways of arriving at the conclusion that the power of homeless people to change their status, the overwhelming majority of those people, that power is essentially 0. But what about the 240 million people? If the 240 million non-homeless people in the United States wanted to change the status of as many homeless people as possible, how many could they change? How many homeless people could the 240 million people change their status so that they are not homeless? All of them. 240 million people in the United States have the collective power to completely end homelessness. And it would take days or weeks. And the only reason it would take that long is logistics. That's it. It would only be the administration of programs to change the status of homeless people to housed people. Days, weeks. The power of the 650,000 people to change their status is essentially zero. But the power of the 240 million adults to change the status of homeless people is total. So if we start with the assumption that all of the homeless people are completely culpable for their homelessness, and we go on and assume that it is 100% correct that it is unfair to burden the non-homeless people with changing the status of the homeless people, to housing the homeless people. But if we also add the fact that the power of the 240 million people to house all homeless people is total, what are we left with? Does that mean we should or should not do it? Does that mean we should or should not force all 240 million of the non-homeless people to participate in a coordinated collective action and pooling of their power to house these homeless people that we are assuming are culpable, completely culpable for their own homelessness? What should we do? Encourage pro-social behavior and join us at Patreon. I am disabled, unable to support myself, and homeless. I need your help to become self-sufficient again. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and please promote the video.